I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo. And good morning, Bowling Green. Good afternoon, Columbus. And hello to everyone listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my wonderful co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and Rebecca together. And I are going to make you an incredible hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them specifically in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of the fish in the lake and the swans that are swimming around in what little water there is unfrozen at the moment, and all the birds and the bees that are huddled together in their little beehives trying to stay warm through this winter, and basically everyone and everything, because, like it or not, all of us critters and animals and plants are wrapped up together on this tiny little planet called Earth. Got a really good show for you this week. We're just going to chat for about another 10 minutes or so, and then we have an interview with a fella named Brett Hartl, and he is with the Center for Biological Diversity, and we are going to go through, because newly reminted President Trump there did a whole bunch of executive orders on his first 2 days in office, and a lot of those orders hurt the environment, frankly. Just we're going to talk about what he did and how that hurts things, and, what we can do about it, if anything. And, I think it's an important thing to review, because I firmly of the belief, and if you don't agree, you can please call in 877-909-1007, 877-909-1007. But I'm firmly of the belief that even the people who voted for Trump weren't voting to destroy the environment. That they somehow believe.
That could be.
Yeah, that even though they were voting for him, because he did say, I want clean air and clean water. And then he did all these executive orders, which are going to do the opposite. But we'll talk about that in the interview. Right now, I just wanted to chat a little bit, like I say. Oh, Rebecca. Then after we have the interview, we'll hear from our sponsors, and then we'll hear from Rebecca. And what will you be talking about this week, Rebecca?
We will be talking about peanut brittle, good candy, bad farming.
Okay. All right. Looking forward to that. So then it'll be ecological news from around the world. A lot of really interesting things happened this year, or this past week around the world, and we'll go over those. And as I said before, hopefully at some point during the hour, we'll hear from you at 877-909-1007. And so wanted to start out, as we have been doing kind of for the past couple of weeks, talking about the weather a little bit. This week, of course, was very below average. In fact, it was much colder here than it was in Anchorage, Alaska this week. And so large parts of the lake have finally frozen over, of Lake Erie. What what did you say you heard the percentage was right now, Rebecca?
80%.
So 80%. So there's still big stretches of open water, but
Mostly over, like, in the Buffalo. Buffalo has a lot of open water, apparently,
yeah.
that area.
This end, the western end, is shallow, and so it freezes more easily than the deeper end over at the eastern end. So
We're also infamous for some really nasty little short, choppy waves that are a pain to sail on, apparently.
yes, because it is so shallow. But so I decided, since there is ice, I decided to go try to track down some ice fishermen. Because actually, even though it's colder, it was colder this last week than average. This coming week, according to the predictions, it's going to be much warmer than average. In fact, it's going to be above freezing every day. And so these past 2 weeks of cold weather were pretty much the only chance that the ice fishermen had to get out there. So I drove out to Metzger Marsh, which has some fishing zones there. And I did manage to track down some ice fishermen, and I recorded an interview that hopefully I'll play next week, just talking to people about doing it. But one thing that I really noticed out there, it was 12 inches of ice at the time. And I walked, for some reason these fishermen had their shanties like a half mile from where they parked to get out onto the ice. But so I was walking out there. It was brutal. The wind was really strong. But even just yesterday, the sun has already, winter solstice has passed. The days are getting longer. The sun is getting higher in the sky. And so even walking back across this marsh, which had this huge long draw, the strength of the wind speed is affected by how long the wind blows without having any obstruction. And when you're on a marsh, which has frozen over, there's like nothing for like a half mile.
That accounts for why it was always so. The snow was always coming in sideways in Bowling Green.
Yes, because it's flat and there's not a lot to block it. So it was pretty brutal walking out there on the ice. But even then, I noticed the sun was higher, and I could feel the warmth of the sun, and I could see little patches that were freezing or that were thawing. I could see little spots where there was a little depression in the ice, so there's kind of a little concave thing going on, and the sunlight was enough to start the melting process. And so even now, even in this coldest snap that we have, it has started to melt already. But I was also thinking, and I'll talk about this a little next week if I get this show together, or this interview together, that this was the perfect day yesterday to have wind and solar power, because the sun was shining really brightly, the wind was blowing really strong. That's the kind of day where if you have windmills and solar panels, you're going to produce more power than you need on a day like yesterday. And that's when you, as we know, as we've talked about, that's when you store the energy, either in battery banks or heat up thermal storage like sand. And you can store that thermal storage, you can store for months. So you could actually use the energy from a bright, sunny, windy day in winter and use it to run your air conditioners in the summer with using thermal storage. So that's what we would be doing right now if we had a sane energy policy. Unfortunately, in the U.S. right now, we have an insane energy policy, and we're going to be talking with Brett Hartl about that, and we're going to go into a little more detail on it. But basically, the overall picture is that the president's set an energy policy that is 180 degrees opposite of what we need to survive. He has gone all in on increasing fossil fuels at the same time that global warming is really starting to take off. So in other words, the worst possible time to start putting more carbon in the air, that's exactly what his policy is. Put more carbon in the air and stop the sane energy sources, the wind and the solar. His policies are actually stopping the cheaper, and I want to emphasize that because we also talk about, how this affects your wallet, how the environment affects your personal wealth, Trump has chosen the most expensive energy sources and has given them all the priority, and he is blocking the cheap energy sources, which could bring down your electric bill. So, but let's get a little more detail on that. This interview is a few minutes longer than average, so we're going to go to it right now. This is our interview with Brett Hartl. Welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name, your title, and your organization?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Brett Hartl. I'm the Government Affairs Director at the Center for Biological Diversity.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Brett. You folks put out a press release back on the 20th, and that's what prompted me to ask for this interview. Your director, Kieran Suckling, made a pretty strong statement in there. He said, talking about Trump, his anti-environment agenda is overwhelmingly unpopular and truly a threat to life on Earth. That's a pretty strong statement. Is that a little bit of hyperbole, or do you think that's really what we're facing right now?
I think we are facing a pretty unprecedented attack on the environment, even compared to the first Trump administration. Obviously, in any administration, there's sort of a reset and things can shift one way or the other ideologically. But in terms of the magnitude, scale, and scope of Trump's initial executive orders on the first day, I think pretty unprecedented and pretty clearly sort of sending a strong signal that environmental protections are sort of the lowest priority for his administration. So obviously a lot's going to unfold in the weeks and months to come, but it's pretty concerning, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the over 1,000 executive orders. So, I mean,
There was so it was over it was over 100. It's hard to count, depends on how you divide each. Like, is every repeal a separate item or not? Because one item alone had repealing something like 78 executive orders, including ones going back, to Bush, Clinton, Obama, even Carter. So there was, I mean, yeah, how to count them is difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going back, I guess, all the way to the 1960s too, in terms of some of the what we would call, more positive presidential orders.
Yeah.
And we're going to drill down a little bit into some of those specifics. One of the things you mentioned in your press release is in drilling in Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
Yeah, so Trump did an entire executive order just about Alaska and increasing resource extraction in Alaska. He's talked obviously during the campaign about drilling in the Arctic Refuge, but not only more drilling there, but drilling further into the National Petroleum Reserve, which is where the Willow project was that unfortunately President Biden approved, but massively expanding those areas, stripping 3 million acres of land in that part of Alaska, which is sort of just west of the Arctic Refuge, of protections, including some of the most important breeding areas for many migratory birds. Lots of the birds that we see in the lower 48 fly to Alaska to breed in the summer, and some of the most important breeding grounds are in those areas. So he's going to eliminate protections there. More drilling potentially offshore as well. More mining in Alaska, so more logging in Alaska. But yeah, I mean, basically almost everywhere in Alaska where there were some levels of strong environmental protection, he's trying to immediately roll those back and direct the Department of Interior to expedite as much drilling as possible.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that he did, and this kind of fits in with the idea that maybe this is a threat to all life on Earth. 2024 was again the hottest year on record. And once again, deja vu, Trump has pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, and again, that is not a new thing. That's a repeat of last time. Immediate withdrawal from all of our international commitments, including the Paris Accord. So basically, anytime that the United States was supporting global climate change fighting efforts, he's also basically said stop those funding initiatives immediately. You know, we're going to walk away from our commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, even though we are still the largest historical contributor to climate change in the world. Um, so in the years where we desperately need to make progress to avert the worst impacts of climate change, we are again going to be effectively sitting on our hands, doing nothing positive, and simultaneously trying to push as much additional fossil fuel extraction as possible. So that's obviously also just a terrible signal to send to the rest of the world, although I think at this point they were most countries were prepared for that. But it's just, you know, we don't have a lot of spare time, and losing 4 more years of just being able to make progress is really a pretty crushing blow. And, there's going to be scientists are already predicting this, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of species around the world that are going to go extinct because of climate change. So making climate change worse is definitely not the way to go from that perspective either. So it is pretty tragic.
Mhm. Yeah, we still use the phrase global warming on our show because climate change is a little change can be good or bad. It's just different, than this.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of parts of it, so that's true. Obviously, sea ice melting, sea levels rising. But acidification. There's lots of threats. But yes, warming is chief among them. Drought, fire, changes in weather, which of course we're seeing already all the time. And yeah, it's going to be a really potentially very bleak future because of the things that the Trump administration is trying to do right now.
Right. I think something we're going to talk about in the show before this interview is how, even though we've got cold right here, the poles actually are having record warmth at this
Yeah,
moment.
yeah. Winter does not go away because of climate change. That's not one of the predicted effects. It's just, winter will still happen. It's just overall global increases in temperature and how those play out in the world. And just because it snows once in New Orleans does not mean climate change isn't happening. In fact, more erratic weather is exactly what scientists predict is a consequence of global warming.
Another thing you mentioned in your press release is the Trump administration trying to roll back California's clean auto emission standards. And just a quick note: conservatives used to use states' rights as a flag of conservatism, but here, literally rolling over states' rights here. Could you talk a little bit about
Yeah, states' rights only when you like them. Otherwise, those are just the liberal woke agenda. So,
that? Gotcha.
nothing particularly new about Republicans doing that, but it is an area of very obvious hypocrisy where they have just never been consistent. That they always support states' rights until they disagree with them, and then they think they are an overreach. So that's pretty consistent. But, obviously, California being able to set the strongest emissions and other regulatory protections when it comes to vehicles is really critical, just because California is such a huge market. Many states follow the California standards, so it has the effect of driving innovation, driving more improvements across basically cars and trucks and other vehicles as aggressively as possible. So if California loses the ability to go ahead of the federal standard, which they have always had since 1970, so again, it's pretty unlawful type of action for Trump to do because California has always had a special position because they have actually very difficult air quality challenges. Weakening those standards that are driving us towards more fuel efficient cars, more electric cars. There is no technical EV mandate, but pushing people to move towards electric vehicles is a critical action if we're going to avert the worst of global warming and climate change, because transportation is the biggest single share of emissions in the United States. It's a big country. We drive a lot. So it's hugely counterproductive. Obviously, some of those things, there will be legal challenges almost immediately. I think folks are still optimistic that at the end of the day, the courts will affirm California's ability to do this. But again, hugely unproductive, unhelpful step for the Trump administration to be taking.
Yeah. So you mentioned courts, and your organization just has a lot of court challenges right now, and
Yeah.
and you're going to basically take these illegal steps on and in court. And so my question is, a lot of people, given that the Supreme Court has become so ideologically unbalanced, um, is fighting in court a realistic strategy?
It's a good question and I think a very valid concern because obviously, the Trump has shifted the court dramatically to the right, and we are seeing judges and justices that are far more ideologically um, driven in terms of their, I guess, verdicts and rulings in these cases. So, I think some of the Supreme Court members are still generally fairly principled. So, as justices go, folks like Justice Roberts generally um, are consistent and follow the law, but we've seen other justices, Trump justices, that are much more willing to just basically do whatever they think fits their ideology. Um, so we don't know, and it's one of those things that only time will tell. Obviously, now that he has a second term, there's also the danger that he will appoint even more judges. And yeah, many of these judges, especially some of the ones in Texas, are just pure ideologues, and they're just going to do whatever the right wing wants them to do. Um, so that our job is harder, and it's harder to win when the deck is stacked against you. So we will see. I think on some things we still feel optimistic, but I think there are certainly other areas where um, we're going to have to be very careful and strategic in how we bring our fights because, yeah, the courts are no longer necessarily reliable.
But
If you saw,
but
oh, sorry, go ahead.
but winning in lower courts, though, um, if you win in enough lower courts, I mean, then kind of you might physically overwhelm the ability to take it to the Supreme Court, right? I mean, because
That's the hope. Yeah. Because the Supreme Court only takes 60, 70 cases a year. Most of them don't reach it. So, yeah, you hope that actually you can win without raising the hackles of the Supreme Court. And they will obviously be busy with other grossly illegal things that Trump does over the next 4 years. If you saw the news just yesterday, a Ronald Reagan era judge threw out Donald Trump's attempt to unilaterally end birthright citizenship, which is obviously grossly unconstitutional. But, the Supreme Court will almost certainly take that case. So hopefully they'll be distracted by other grotesque abuses of power and maybe not focus so much on the environmental cases that are floating around out there.
I did want to ask you about one of the specific things that he did. Um, so in the final days of the Biden administration, he used the offshore
Yeah. Outer
continental
Continental
shelf
Shelf Lands Act.
act, right, to ban new oil drilling and in much oil and gas drilling along much of the coast.
Yeah.
Um, and so the whole thing that we were told at that time was this is great because it can't be reversed by executive order. And then Trump immediately in one of these terrible executive orders banned offshore wind using the same act. But then he also issued an executive order overturning the Biden ban, even though this is what we were told is you can't do because of the law that was invoked.
Yeah.
Yeah, is this fairly typical of the sort of things he did with all these executive orders?
It's, I'm glad you caught that. I think it's a really sort of amusing contradiction in the sense that obviously it's not like Trump wrote any of them, right? I mean, at most he understood the broad brush, what they're going to do, but he's not a detail person, right? So, yeah, they simultaneously basically said, well, we're going to withdraw this giant, withdrawal that Biden did, but we're also going to simultaneously do an even bigger withdrawal of the entire ocean for wind. Like every single bit of the ocean no longer can do wind because Trump, hates wind and he says that it makes the whales go crazy, which I always just think is kind of funny, but nonetheless, it's not particularly consistent. And yeah, there will be an immediate, I think, court fight over that. There was a previous court decision that said that this law, the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, which applies to basically all federal ocean waters, it's a strangely titled law. That law does not allow the rescission of a withdrawal. It only allows a president to withdraw areas, and the only entity that can reverse it is Congress. So it is a one-way ratchet. The court was pretty clear. Again, Trump doesn't really care what courts think or what the law is. That's sort of their approach. So, that'll be an immediate court fight as well.
And,
And
and just to
yeah,
be and just to be clear on the whole question of driving whales crazy and so forth, the Europeans, of course, have been massively developing their offshore wind.
yeah.
UK gets like 60% of their power now from offshore wind, and they've done many, many studies, and they don't show any harm, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are impacts of offshore wind in the sense that we have to do it right, and you have to think through all aspects of it, and that's normal. The biggest threats from offshore wind in the United States are actually simply the vessel traffic. So, you have to make sure that the boats don't go fast. Right whales are one of the most endangered whales in the world, and ship collisions is a huge issue. So they have to just require all ships to drive really slowly, and that's, not difficult to overcome. But the sort of notion that they, drive whales crazy, which is what Trump said, is obviously just sort of nonsensical. There are impacts to every single thing that humans do, but on the aggregate, offshore wind's impacts are not of the same magnitude as, let's say, offshore oil drilling, which it always spills no matter what, right? Like it's not a question of if, it's just when. There's spills every day. They're small, but the pollution from them is much more significant and much more damaging to marine environments. So, nothing is zero, but the notion that they drive them crazy is crazy. And this is just Trump hates how they look. I think they wanted to put one in near his golf course in Scotland. He just doesn't like them. Many of his rich benefactors also don't like them. It's sort of NIMBYism on a massive scale. And you know, but yes, in a larger sense of your question, like it is sort of ironic that he did these two actions on the same day that are completely contradictory. And they again just sort of show that the agenda is just fossil fuels above all. And that's really what we're looking at.
All right. So how can people follow you in this fight? What can people do to stay, on the side of the earth here?
Yeah, I think, there's been a lot of not only reporting, but obviously I think we all feel the sentiment of it's exhausting. It's going to be a long grind these next 4 years with Trump coming back and doing everything again. And I think one is just stay engaged. Don't just check out of the process. Make sure your representatives are still hearing from you. Every time Trump does something terrible, it's important to make sure that people that disagree don't just sit silently or concede or say, well, he's the president, we have to work with him. People should signal that they still expect accountability and to have our elected representatives support and defend our laws and our principles as a country. That's really critical. Obviously, please do support all the nonprofits across the board, not only in the environment, but elsewhere, trying to protect, again, our own rights, our values, the things that our country in theory still does hold dear. That's important as well. There's many organizations part of these efforts. Our website is biologicaldiversity.org, so you can certainly find us there. That's not. Oh, actually, the other thing too, I would just remind folks. I knew there was one more. In all of these efforts, obviously, it's also important to remember that despite flaws and shortcomings, to also support all of the people that work for the federal agencies, right? There's millions of civil servants, including thousands and thousands that work at the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of the Interior, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and onwards. They are the ones that actually are implementing all of our environmental laws, that are trying every day to make the air and water cleaner, protect our wildlife, protect our public lands. And they are going to be under attack directly in a way we have not seen before. And it's easy and it's convenient to blame them and to criticize them as unelected bureaucrats and whatever. And we've seen this type of rhetoric before, demonizing them. But remember that they're all working to uphold the laws, doing the best they can. And we need them, and so to support them too is really critical, because we've already seen the Trump and Elon Musk saying how they want to reduce the federal workforce by 70% and gut everything to the bone. But they never take a step back and say, well, whose jobs do you want to cut? Do you want to cut the people that keep the planes in the sky, all the air traffic controllers? Do you want to get rid of all of our park rangers that protect our national parks? You want to get rid of everyone at the EPA that makes sure that your air and water are clean, that your food is not contaminated with pesticides and other chemicals. It's really critical to support them too, because they are the ones that actually are keeping us safe and healthy.
Okay. And I do want to emphasize, thanks for listening to that interview with Brett Hartl from the Center for Biological Diversity. I want to emphasize that keeping us all safe and healthy is kind of one of the reasons we started this program, going on 6 years ago now, because, I actually was listening to Mick Gonzalez on the Cheap Seats before on the way in here, and he started his show off talking about some terrible experiences he had because he's battling cancer again. And once again, we wish Mick complete recovery and full health and so forth. But better than being able to treat cancer and putting people through experiences like Mick just went through is preventing the cancers in the first place. And literally, that's what those people at the EPA are trying to do every day, to the degree they're allowed to do it. And those kind of protections, every show we start out talking about your wealth, your health, your happiness. Getting cancer can wipe all those things out immediately. People lose their homes because they're trying to pay their medical bills. And so every time we stop a weakening of these environmental regulations, every time we prevent these toxic chemicals and this radiation from getting put out into the environment and hurting people, that's a win for us. That's a win for the good guys. So, and we cheer on the Center for Biological Diversity because they're one of the main knights in this battle against the dark forces of pollution. So thanks very much. And we also want to thank our patrons. Our patrons are wonderful people who also understand the importance of protecting the environment, and they understand the importance of giving information to people in order to make that happen. There are people who've gone to patreon.com, that's Patreon, and every month a little bit comes out of their accounts, comes over to us according to their ability and desire to pay. And that's how we can keep the show on the air and keep talking to your folks and keep landing these amazing interviews with people like Brett Hartl and other activists and scientists and the hundreds of people who are just in this fight for you every week that we bring on this show. So thank you very much to our patrons, and please become one. Okay, we need more patrons, don't we, Rebecca?
We certainly do.
Yes, so just go to patreon.com, search for our For a Green Future, and up will pop, and you'll be able to become one of the chosen or self-chosen, but still wonderful few, the patrons of For a Green Future. Okay, Rebecca, now it's time to talk to you, to have your turn at the mic. Go ahead, lay it on us.
Okay. Well, today is actually National Peanut Brittle Day, which is really cool. I'm very in favor of peanut brittle.
I had
in
no
general,
idea.
as a concept. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I thought I'd look at a couple of the major, three of the major ingredients and their environmental impact. First, you got peanuts. Latin name Arachis, hypogaea maybe. Anyway, they are a legume, which is the edible seeds or fruit of a plant in the family Fabaceae, I believe, including peas, beans, and lentils. The family in general is high in protein, fiber, magnesium, potassium, and the main ingredient in many plant-based meat alternatives. And people can do Ethiopian restaurants do the most amazing things with lentils. It's like you got lentils and a side of lentils on your plate, and they're all amazing. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, yeah. So they're also low in calories and have a low on the glycemic index, which means they help you feel full for longer. Had to look this up, but it relates to how quickly they raise your blood sugar levels. And I think what you want there is sort of a gradual rise and keeps it sort of at a moderate level for a long time and then gradually tapers off. You don't want a spike in a dip, basically. So, yeah, beans and other legumes are good for that. And, of course, glycemic is based on glucose, which means blood sugar. So, yeah, some problems associated with peanuts is the problems associated with monoculture, basically. Water pollution, water scarcity they contribute to, and greenhouse gas emissions, basically. I think from, like, tractors and from probably having to haul them around to the brittle processing plant. Then you got cane sugar, which is a tall, perennial tropical grass native to Asia. I didn't know that. They started there with the chickens, apparently. It has a sugary juice, which you can refine into sugar, which is why people like it so much. It's in the genus Saccharum. It looks a little bit like bamboo to me, possibly because it's got these segmented stalks. It can grow to 6 to 20 feet tall. Plants as a whole. It's got a thick fibrous jointed stalks, and and the sugar accumulates at the stalk internodes, which means the part that doesn't have any leaves or roots on it, basically.
Uh-huh.
An internode is like a little sort of you see a little couple of leaves come out of the stem at the joint there, and so it's like in the body that doesn't have anything else on it.
So you can't just grab one and start chewing, randomly. You've got to focus in on that little part of the stalk to get the sugar.
You have a better experience if you get in the middle. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So, yeah, some problems associated with it again are, and sugarcane has been infamous for monoculture in the Caribbean, major contributor to slavery, and also the Industrial Revolution, because people really needed quick, high-energy, low-quality snacks, is because they were going to be, at home, away from home at all hours, and people couldn't really cook for them. So, yeah, they have high water usage, habitat destruction for plantations, which creates soil erosion, water pollution from the fertilizer runoff, air pollution from burning the fields, which is apparently a thing they do to sort of clear them, and it also it adds to the quality of the soil. But yeah, and also the wastewater from the mills are not great.
Wow, so pretty devastating so far. What's left?
Butter.
Butter.
Is a dairy product made by churning cream to separate the fat and the protein. Butter is 80% milk fat with water, salt, and other milk solids. And as with sugar, I am personally a big fan. It has vitamin D and calcium in it, and its use dates to 9000 BC. The Egyptians use it for mummification, so smear me in butter and draw my brains out through my nose. That's how they did mummification.
Okay.
Yeah, there's bitumen involved too. Anyway, so it can be made from the milk of cows, sheep, goats, buffaloes, or yaks. Also, it's mostly cows, and the environmental impact is like the other ones, only worse. Greenhouse gas from the cows, methane, high water usage for feed production, manure runoff. Land degradation from the food crops that you have to feed to the critters to make the butter, and ammonia apparently is released. Ammonia emissions are not good either. So yeah, so you can swap it out with vegan butter, which is better in the sense that it definitely eliminates the problem of cows walking around and emitting methane. Although there's still me, so we're still in trouble. Sorry, I may have moved the deadline for the world burning down up like a couple of weeks this week.
Through your butter consumption?
No, it was not through butter consumption.
Okay.
There might have been dairy involved, though. Yeah, I don't digest that well, but yeah.
Got it.
So vegan butter is made out of vegetable oils and non-dairy milks. Obviously, palm oil is the worst case scenario there, but yeah, we'll just say that our vegan butter here is made out of olive oil, which is a little better. So you're probably talking soy milk, which destroys habitat with deforestation, generates greenhouse gases, erodes the soil, and also causes degradation and compaction of soil. The soil becomes less fertile and more prone to forest fires. And also there's a transportation from the product from one place to another. And okay, but how exactly, you ask, Becca, does poor soil or dry soil lead to wildfires? Well, first of all, dry soil can apparently burn. I did not know this. Also, it removes the roots, like to make the sugar cane, which kills off the plants, which were depending on the roots. And then they're dead and dry, and they catch fire pretty easily. Also, it creates something which I had never heard of called hydrophobic soil. No, this does not mean it has rabies, thank God. It creates soil which repels water because the gas from the burning plants creates a waxy coating over the soil. So the soil's down there and it's kind of sealed off, and the water then it gets drier and it burns better. And
wow.
It probably creates downstream flooding, also downhill flooding. So that the moral here, I think, is not that peanut brittle is especially bad, or that everything's just bad, so don't even bother eating vegan or something. Yeah, I'm not a vegan, but it is a thing you can do for the environment. And but yeah, I think the moral here is that the way that we farm is not good in general. It needs some major overhauls.
Okay. Well, thanks, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
I was hoping I could eat peanut brittle guilt-free today, since it's peanut brittle day.
You can't eat. Eating is bad. It hurts the environment.
Wow. Okay.
Not really.
Well, thanks. All right. Well, so time to move on to ecological news. And our first story is a reminder that even though it's cold here, there is a whole other part to the planet that, we don't often hear about on the news. Australia, for example, in newcom.au, January 22nd has a story, Australian heat wave. Basically, right now, while we're freezing up here in North America, Australia, they're having 115-degree days, especially in Queensland and New South Wales. That's 47 degrees above average. And at night, it's only cooling down to 77, which is still too hot to sleep comfortably. So they have to have their AC going 24 hours a day now in Australia because of this huge heat wave. It's created fire danger warnings. And of course, now it's not just Australia. The rest of the world, according to the Global Weather Network, and they did a story on this on the 24th, the whole globe, except for North America. It's kind of bizarre. If you look at the map of the world laid out flat, it's like we're blue and literally everywhere else is red. And so, especially in the countries that in the places that start with an A, for some weird reason, Asia, Alaska, Antarctica, Africa, those are all above average. the globe is 0.88 degrees centigrade or 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit above average for the week of the 14th through the 22nd. As we mentioned at the start, it's 36 degrees in Anchorage right this minute, above freezing, and it's still dark there. So at night, above freezing in Anchorage. And this is why we continue, we mentioned this in the interview, we continue to say global warming here, not climate change, because this is the overall effect is the globe.
I say climate change sometimes, but I see Joe's point.
Well, I slip. I say climate change once in a while too. I do slip sometimes, but it overall, what the whole point is, because global warming reminds us that we are caught in a
positive feedback loop.
Yes, positive feedback loop, because you put more carbon in the air, that causes warming, and the warming puts more carbon in the air, and that is a positive feedback loop. All you need for a positive feedback loop is an input, an amplification, and then you put that amplification back into the input. And whether it's blowing the speakers with a microphone or setting off a nuclear bomb, it doesn't matter. The process is still positive feedback loop, and the process here is heating, not just change. Okay, next story, EnergyMix.com. This is a story January 24th. New program offers Texans free solar and storage. And it's a very innovative little program they've got going down there in Texas. It started on the 16th, and what they're doing is they offer people free solar panels on their houses with free batteries and a guaranteed lower price for electricity. That is, they lock in the price for the solar-generated electricity at 12 cents per kilowatt hour, as opposed to down there, the average retail price is around 20 cents per kilowatt hour, so almost half. But the little switch here, the twist is that the companies that put it up, a company called Solrite and another company called Sonnen, they actually continue to own the panels, and the property owner is giving up the right to sell the excess electricity into the grid. And so what they're doing, what these companies are hoping to do, is to, by using the batteries that they're storing the excess power from, to basically use all these batteries as a virtual power plant that can kick in during the periods of high demand, during the peak demand, when the electricity prices, quintuple, sextuple, go 10 times normal, sometimes 100 times normal. So they're going to pull the power from your battery at those times in order to make maximum profit. But you also have the battery as a backup for your house. So if the grid goes down, like it did a couple of years ago when they lost 600 people because the grid went down and their heaters weren't working, in that situation, the battery just powers your house. So you have the advantage of the battery backup and lower electricity prices, what is generating normally. The companies make the profit off selling that electricity into the grid at the most profitable times. It's a pretty good system. It looks like it's got a lot of promise. My only thing is there have to be a couple little caveats, like you'd have to ensure that they leave a minimum amount of battery charge in your house so that if things do go down, you have some backup power. But other than that, it's it might work. It might be a model that'll help us get more solar panels up. Next story, Ember. This is a story that was on. They did a review. It's the EU electricity review for 2024, and very encouraging news from the European Union. Solar is up 11% from 2023 to 2024. Natural gas use is down. It's dropped 20% in 5 years. In 2019, the EU only had 39% wind and solar. In 2024, they had 47% wind and solar. So it looks like 2025, they're going to cross the halfway mark, and most power in the EU will be generated with either wind or solar power. At the same time, fossil fuels continued to drop. In 2019, fossil fuels represented 39.6% of the power, and in 2024, it was down to 29%. So a 10% drop in 5 years. Another big thing that happened in 2024 was that the solar finally passed coal. Solar generation went up 22% from 2023 to 2024. And so now solar puts more power on the grid than coal does in the EU. Wind power passed coal a long time ago. And now wind wind is the second biggest supplier of electricity in the entire EU. Nukes supply more; they're the biggest, but that's only because of France, which has been nuclear addicted since the 70s. And take France away, and wind and solar far surpass nuclear in the rest of the EU. All right, so that was some nice news. Next story, some not so nice news. Going off to powerengineering.com, and a story based in South Carolina. Title of this article was Partially Built and Abandoned Nuclear Project in South Carolina Could See New Life. And I wanted to give you the details from Power Engineering because they're usually a really good source. But this morning I tried to follow the link to the article, and the article was gone. 404, page not found. And the reason I wanted to tell you about this, though, and I was able to find a story from another source, but this is they're talking about the VC Summer nuclear power plant, and that was the nuclear power plant which had a tremendous scandal because the executives of the company that was building them lied to Congress, they lied to regulators, they lied to investors, and basically they were pretending they could bring this thing in for something like a reasonable cost at a reasonable time, even as it was becoming clearer and clearer that, like all nuclear projects, it was going massively over budget and way behind schedule. And 4 executives actually have been found guilty, and 3 out of the 4 went to prison. The most recent one was just last in November. A fellow named Jeffrey Benjamin. He got sentenced to a year and a day in prison for keeping false records. Kevin Marsh, another executive, 2 years, and he had to pay a fine of $5 million. Stephen Byrne, 15 months, had to pay $1 million. Carl Churchman, who wasn't a member of the utility, he was just a member of Westinghouse, the company that was building the nuke for the utility. He only got 6 months of house arrest, basically, but they all pled guilty. And what the story in Live News 5 is on January 23rd is that the owner, the utilities that own it, like Santee Cooper, which is a state-owned utility, by the way, has put out an RFP asking, won't somebody please buy our terrible plague-ridden nuclear power plant? And they're hoping someone will take it off their hands because right now it's just sitting there doing nothing. And we, of course, hope nobody takes it, or maybe somebody takes it to turn it into like a disco or something, because there's a lot of open space inside those
that would be cool.
Chambers. Yeah. All right, so that's that. This next story, okay, this is a really important story because nukesters always talk about, as soon as you bring up radioactive waste, they say, oh, we could recycle it, which is a lie to begin with, because there's 2 elements in nuclear waste that can be quote unquote recycled, that is extracted and used again as fuel. That's 2 out of 200 radioactive isotopes that are produced in here in a nuclear power plant. But this story, UK to dispose of radioactive plutonium stockpile, and that was in The Guardian. And what's happened there is the UK tried to do this recycling. They've spent 50 years and billions, tens of billions, I think it was hundreds of billions of dollars, extracting the plutonium from used fuel with the idea that they're going to reuse it in other reactors. And what they found is that nobody wants to reuse this stuff in other reactors because plutonium is really dangerous. It fissions so much more easily, and so it's so easy to get a runaway reaction with plutonium. It's just much more expensive and dangerous than using uranium. And so the UK is sitting on almost 200 tons of this plutonium that it spent 50 years making. And they had accidents there with radiation spills that killed people. with cancers and so forth over these decades. And so what they finally decided was, they've been sitting on this. They actually shut the program down last year. They at least had the brains to stop making more. But they finally this year reached the decision, well, we're going to just basically treat this as nuclear waste again. They're going to, for recycling, they're going to decycle it. They're going to mix it with a ceramic material, and they're going to bury it. They've given up. They've tried for 50 years to do this recycling. It just doesn't work. And so all these nukesters who just constantly, as soon as you bring up waste, they say, oh, recycling. The UK just proved conclusively that you could spend billions of dollars, decades refining these wastes, and all you end up with is another batch of more concentrated waste. And so they're going to be burying it somewhere in England, and that's also a big controversy. All right. Last story. Yes. This is another little bad news story from the UK. This was in the ecologist.org on the 17th. Incinerator ban up in smoke. And so what happened is the Liberal Labour Party has decided to allow waste to be incinerated, and they were supposed to ban waste incineration because it makes tons of pollution, doesn't really solve any problems, but instead they passed this law saying, well, if it reduces the amount of waste going to a landfill, that it's okay, which of course burning stuff reduces the volume. I mean, that's what happens when you burn stuff.
True.
So
but we have to breathe that air.
Yeah, exactly. So all right, and they think the reason they did this is because somebody took $20,000 in bribes from a climate change denier, and right after taking that donation, they scuttled $56 billion in green investment. It's kind of like Trump did. He took $455 million from big oil companies this past election, and then, of course, destroyed wind power, offshore wind power. So I guess we're better. We're more great because our politicians take more money to bribe than British politicians.
Yeah, bigger is better, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we'll be back next week.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting,